she said she told the doctor that she was a bleeder, but that was 1988. And so they said, you cannot be a bleeder because you're a woman. When the surgery happened, she died on the operating table of bleeding.
Welcome to Where Hope Begins, the Save One Life podcast. One country, one community, and one life at a time. I'm your host, Kai. Today we're joined by Andrea Hernandez Trinidad of the Philippines, a former journalist, communication strategist, and president of Hemophilia Advocates Philippines, internationally recognized as the face of hemophilia in the Philippines. Her connection to bleeding disorders is deeply personal. She lost her mother to an undiagnosed bleeding disorder in 1988, a tragedy that would later reveal a condition running through her own family. She herself lives with von Willebrand disease and hemophilia A, and all three of her children were born prematurely due to bleeding complications during pregnancy. That lived experience, grief, diagnosis, and resilience is what drives one of the most powerful patient advocacy movements in Southeast Asia. We're going to start with our personal journey, then explore what change looks like on the ground in the Philippines, and how support through Save One Life helps that change last. Andrea, welcome to the podcast. It's truly an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Kai.
Fantastic. So for listeners meeting you for the first time, can you take us back to the beginning, to your mother, Sophia?
So I was 17 at that time. She had a scheduled surgery for supposedly a condition that almost every woman would have in their lives. That's myoma. So the doctor scheduled her for operation, and she told the doctor that she was a bleeder, but that was 1988. And so they said, no, you cannot be a bleeder because you're a woman. So then when the surgery happened, she died on the operating table of bleeding.
Thank you for sharing that, and such a sad story and such a reminder of the additional challenges women face in the bleeding disorders community. But you later discovered that you had inherited that same condition. So can you walk us through that realization and then, moving forward into the birth of your children?
Growing up, I was always anemic. So I always had iron infusions. And then during my puberty, I was bleeding a lot, and I would always see a doctor, and sometimes I would have blood transfusions. But I was never told that I have a bleeding disorder until I gave birth to my youngest daughter, Star. At 3 weeks old, she had a nosebleed, so we took her to the ER. But her cousin, who's 2 years older than her, was recently diagnosed with hemophilia A. So when we took her to the ER, I told the doctors that could she possibly have hemophilia because her cousin got diagnosed with hemophilia A very recently. My mom died of bleeding. And my grandmother from my dad's side also died of bleeding. So I said, it looks like both of my families had a problem with bleeding. But then the doctor said, oh, your daughter cannot have a bleeding disorder because she's a girl. So it went on and on. But meantime, she would always nosebleed like at least once a week. And I said, this is not normal. So I brought her to 10 doctors before we finally saw this hematologist who said that she could have von Willebrand disease. But then that was like 2004. At the time, 2004, there was no laboratory for, factor assay here in the Philippines. I had to take her to Hong Kong for that. And it was in Hong Kong that we were both diagnosed with von Willebrand disease. So that was it. But, at the back of my mind, I remember my father would always have this swelling on his knees. And we just thought it was arthritis. And then years later, I became an advocate for the bleeding disorders community, especially for women with bleeding disorders, because here in the Philippines, back in the early 2000s, whenever you say that, you have symptoms of bleeding disorder, the doctors would immediately say that that's von Willebrand maybe, but never hemophilia. In 2018, I was in the US, and this medical director of a medical facility in Nevada, she invited me and she said, okay, let's run genetic test on you and then factor assay. And when the results came back, it turns out that I have hemophilia A and Von Will brand.
Wow. Again, thank you for sharing. And, it sounds like your journey of just getting to a diagnosis. I mean, you had to go all the way to Hong Kong to find a
Yeah.
doctor who could appropriately. And then again, you had to go all the way to Nevada to get a to proper diagnosis. So I guess talk to us about how in your advocacy work, your experience as a mother trying to find the answer you needed as opposed to what you were being told.
I was a journalist, right? Actually, I'm still a journalist. I still write right now. So, because I'm a writer, I started to blog. It's called For the Love of Star back in 2004, I think, when Star was showing symptoms. And then after we got diagnosed, I shared our journey because she was always having nosebleeds. And even when she was born, she had bruises all over her body. But I did not understand. I thought, oh, these are birthmarks. And then they disappear. And then when she started crawling, she would get bruises again on her legs. We went to school 6 months. And the teachers would always tell me, she always has nosebleed. Maybe there's something wrong with her. So I started to write about it. And then people started reaching out to me, especially women. And they said, oh, we also have that one. And the doctors would always say, "Oh, women cannot be bleeders because only guys would get hemophilia." That kind of thing. The people who were reaching out to me with, we talked about forming a community. So we started talking, and then I think 2006 when we got diagnosed, I wrote all the like hemophilia groups that I could find online, including Lori Kelly. And then
Mm,
she came to the Philippines in 2008. So I joined her in going around and I was so surprised. Like, oh my gosh, this a lot of people are suffering. And at the time when we got diagnosed, I didn't know that there was a community and I felt so alone. I felt scared.
yeah.
And then medicines were not available in the Philippines. That's how my mom died because there was no medicine available in the Philippines, only blood products. So I started to contact these pharma companies and even, helped in the importation of these products because I wanted my daughter to have at least some sense of normalcy in her life. So we would do prophylaxis for her. But for me, I did not do prophylaxis. It's so expensive because it's out of pocket and,
Hmm.
the cost of the factors here in the Philippines. So I would always get blood transfusion or yeah, fresh frozen plasma or cryoprecipitate. And then it occurred to me like I could not imagine how much people would spend. Like, how could they afford the treatments, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have money, the factors are not available in the Philippines. And finally, I volunteered with Lori. I said, okay, I can be your volunteer here in the Philippines. So when people would request for factors from Lori, I would take it to the hospital and I would do hospital visits.
Wow, yeah, it's such an incredible journey, and I think one thing that kind of sticks out to me is, you just using your passion of writing to do some
Yeah.
blogging, you were beginning to create community, right? And
Yeah.
people would share their stories with you, and then here comes Lori, the ultimate connector of
Correct.
community to get you to the, kind of those communities that are dealing with similar issues. And so this long road to a community, it seems, ended in the co-founding of the Hemophilia Advocates of the Philippines in 2016. So what is the reality of Filipino families with bleeding disorders, and how does your foundation help these families in need?
So we were part of the national organization actually here in the Philippines. But in 2016, I think, no, 2015, when I was the chair of the women's group for that organization. And then when I moved to the US, I resigned. And in 2016, I decided to come back because my kids don't like it in the US. So I decided to come back. And people were still reaching out to me, asking for factors. So I said, like, why don't we form an organization that really addresses all these concerns? I know someone who knows someone, right? As a journalist in a national newspaper. So it became easier for us to get big amounts of factors. So I said,
Mm,
okay, I cannot do this alone. So that's how it started. First, there were like 50 plus, less than 60 people who attended our first general assembly. And then we wrote to a local, national hospital. It's called Philippine Children's Medical Center. It's the hospital referral center, like for pediatric cases, so all over the Philippines. And then they adopted us as a patient group for
wow.
hemophilia. Now we had a space where we could meet every month. And then the numbers just keep on growing and growing and growing. And I said, people are so hungry to listen, like to the doctors. So we called it Patient Education Program, PEP, for our monthly meetings. So it's not just gathering of people or families with hemophilia. It was more of educating everyone's. And what I realized is every meeting we would do after the doctor's talk, we would do like a huddle for women, or we would break into small groups and then share experiences. People would travel like 15 hours, 16 hours just to be part of
Wow.
it. My God, like they're so hungry to meet, people with like families with the same disorder, and just sharing their experiences. Now we're going to celebrate our 10th year this year. Now we have more than 1,500 members.
Wow. So it's really incredible to hear how just these really what feels like natural progressions of just making connections and seeing space or seeing holes in care where there needs to be advocacy. And then you're about to celebrate 10 years with so many people. It's really incredible. So I guess when it comes to how your organization partners with international organizations like Save One Life, what makes those partnerships possible and what do they allow you to do?
Even Life has really been very instrumental in changing lives of so many people. Every year we release like an average of maybe 3 million or 4 million units to the patients. So we address like we help at least 1,000 to 1,500 um, persons with hemophilia every year. Here in the Philippines, there are about 1,600 persons diagnosed with hemophilia. So we've been able, because of Project Share, the donations from Project Share, to send factors to the Philippines because of some problems with our government. Sadly, they charge taxes for humanitarian donations, which is crazy, actually. I've seen people who used to be like bedridden for months. Now they have work, so there's a sense of normalcy in their lives. We may not be able to support prophylaxis treatment, but at least for the life threatening bleeds, we've been able to address this.
Wow, and it's such an incredible partnership. And can you think of a before and after story of a family or maybe a patient that you've come in contact with who maybe didn't have resources beforehand, was connected with your group and how they are today?
When Lori came here, I met Jeff during Lori's trip here, and her mom approached me that Jeff wanted to finish his school, but Jeff's mom was a laundry woman who could not send Jeff to school. So Jeff became a Save One Life scholar for college, and he was able to finish the university. And after that, he became a when he worked, became a manager and was able to buy a house for his mom, right? The lives of these kids, I met them as, when they were like teenagers, and now they're adults. 10 years later, they're, their lives have really changed. One family have two boys with severe hemophilia B, and it's so difficult to get factor nine. And years later, like just maybe during the pandemic, the mom reached out to me and she said like, "Do you remember that you've helped us, you visited us in the hospital?" I said, "No." And oh, but I remember the case of the son. The mom told me that their lives have really changed because of the help that our organization has been providing the patients. So
Yeah.
there are stories that are really that make it worthwhile, because sometimes I just want to give up, really.
Yeah.
It's so
Truly.
tiring. And
Right.
I have work, I have a business. So many lives have changed.
Yes, yes, certainly. And, you're a big part of that. And, I'm sure there are many, many, many more stories you could tell. But you did kind of mention, how exhausting the work can be and kind of the emotional weight that families carry when they have a bleeding disorder. And I know that you are a big advocate for mental health with families with bleeding disorders. I guess May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So did you have any thoughts, or what does your advocacy look like when it comes to kind of the mental health?
I'm also part of the ADHD Society here in the Philippines. And before I became a hemophilia advocate, I was advocating for autism. My eldest son is in the spectrum, and all of my three kids have ADHD. So, I very much aware about mental health and the difficulty of sometimes getting through, and the impact of the pain. I realized, like, in my conversations with my kids, the two other kids, they don't have bleeding disorder, but they said they felt like they're being left out. Facing this, like, oh, the disorder is a lot of dimensions. You face the issue, like, even for myself, we did not have, when I was growing up, there was no mental health. I mean, it wasn't a word back then.
Right. Yeah. It's certainly been, destigmatized over the years.
It wasn't a name back then. But then seeing this, how our youth are facing, even the parents, like, parents, I've seen families separate, couples separating. The impact of the the disorder to the patient, I've seen it. So that's why I started to really have more focus on having the support system. Like, we have the mothers group, the men's group, women's group, men's group, and then the youth. And then our youth would do home visits, because we've had several, not a lot, but a few of them who actually self-harm. When other youth would reach out to them or would do home visit, they feel the support. Having a mental health program really helps. It's not just kids who feel, who have this mental health issues, but even us, even adults can have, can face those issues. It's not easy.
Yeah, no, of course. And those feelings of isolation,
Right.
as a caretaker, not being able to take care of yourself. So
Right.
it's really impressive that you've brought that piece of it to the forefront to create these women's groups, men's groups, youth groups,
Yeah.
to kind of, again, going back to that idea of community and sharing. And at least if I could tell my story and be heard, that could maybe
Yeah.
alleviate some of the mental strain that I've been under. And in addition to that, as we kind of look to wrap up our conversation here, there's some legislative advocacy that you are working on, specifically the Bleeding Disorders Standard of Care Act.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, where's that legislation at currently, and what does it intend to do?
The Bleeding Disorder Standard of Care Act is supposed to push for all regional hospitals in the Philippines to have a hemophilia program. So, to have hemophilia treatment center in each regional hospital. So we have, I think, 10 regions. So in each region should have they have a regional hospital. The access, we're really pushing for access to treatment, so that in the future, with or without hemophilia advocates, patients have access to treatment, because the Philippines is composed of 7,641 islands. And we've had experiences where some islands do not have hospitals or do not have a hematologist. So we have a patient who came from one island going to the island that has a hospital, and he died along the way. So in this bill, it's supposed to address that wherever they are, they should be able to access treatment that is funded
Yeah.
by the government.
Absolutely. And again, going back to that idea that although humanitarian donations, are great and welcomed, it's not necessarily as sustainable as, an
Right.
actual government support. And so I'm so glad you're taking on that initiative. And yet another thing that's on your plate as someone who's advocating for all these things. So, Andrea, thank you so much for being here. And I think I just wanted to close with, a message of hope. What gives you hope right now in the Philippines concerning bleeding disorders, that your advocacy work, and what would you tell, a patient or caregiver who might feel really alone right now? What would you want them to hear?
What's giving me hope is that the doctors are really supporting us. There are three organizations for the hematologists, and all of them, we have formed this group called One Hemophilia, One Philippines, together with the doctors. So it was actually the initiative of the doctors to form this group and to unite all the regional hemophilia organizations to have one voice, a more sustainable access to treatment for everyone all
Hmm.
over the Philippines. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to keep on talking or sharing your story so that people will listen. And with that,
Yeah.
by sharing stories, we will be able to get the attention of our government.
Absolutely. And of course, you sharing your story today, and your story has changed so many people's lives. And we're so grateful for your partnership. And thank you so much for being here today, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Kai. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience.
Of course. And to all you listening, thank you for listening to Where Hope Begins, one country, one community, and one life at a time. To learn more about Save One Life and how sponsorship transforms lives, visit saveonelife.net/sponsorship. Until next time, everyone, take care. Thank you for listening to Where Hope Begins, the Save One Life podcast, because when one life is supported, generations can be transformed. Presented by Save One Life in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. Produced by me, Kai. Got an idea for the show? Send me an email at kai@balancinglifesissues.com. Did today's story move you? Sponsor a child at saveonelife.net/sponsorship. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah, Dada.